Hello, once again, everyone. And this week, at least the first part, we're going to deal with World War II. And in the second half of the week, some of the results of it. And so, what I'm going to do is spend probably a little more time on the Second World War than I originally anticipated, simply because there's so much there and it has such an impact on our world even to this day. So, what we're looking at is allies and enemies and that global context. I think that is incredibly important because if World War I showed us anything, it showed us that the world is not as large as we thought it was, and that America cannot get out of any of these type of entanglements. You look at our foreign policy in the 1930s; it was this isolationism, and by 1941, America was right in the middle of it. So the global context is going to be very doing that, we need to start off with the Grand Alliance, and that's our relationship with Great Britain, who is, to us in the 21st century, that is America's greatest ally. They have always been our most steadfast ally. The Australians say, "Whoa, hold on just a second, there, boss," but they're considered to be that they're very that I've got here. We think they're all moving in lockstep to defeat the Axis, and waging war in peace and harmony. I mean, that's a great thing. Language, government ideas, culture, but it's not always been that way. That's something that's relatively modern in this. All right, a lot of the times we think of the American and the British relationship as something that has been going on for years and years and years, but it really hasn't. It's more of a 20th century phenomenon. And a lot of the issues we had were based off general disdain for Europe. It's the mother country and things like that. We had to break away from them. But also, a lot of them revolve around things like trade and boundaries, neutrality rights. You see that little picture down in the left-hand corner. That's of the Mason-Slidell incident, or the Trent affair during the American Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln stopped a British ship that had two Confederate emissaries on it. Well, that's kind of a violation of neutrality rights. And so the British, the Americans, oh my goodness, about to have a war. So there's a little antipathy there. And you look at England and his empire being the antithesis of America. We had to break away from that empire. 13 colonies decided, you know what, we're going to break away. You look at George Washington's farewell address, the War of 1812. All of these things, we've had some historical issues where Great Britain was not our friend, but was almost an enemy. But what happens is tend to improve. And it's by the late 19th century or turn of the 20th century, just before the time period this class started, because America is a rising world power. You look at the Great White Fleet down at the right. America gained that empire in the Spanish-American War, the Philippines. I mean, the American empire spans the globe in so many ways. And so now what you've got is the preeminence of America in the Western Hemisphere, especially with Roosevelt's corollary to the Monroe Doctrine that says, not only do y'all not get to come over here, we will be the policemen and we will take care of things. So you've got that. And then this should modifies things instead of World War II, because that's kind of the focus, so I can't type, and y'all know that. So what happens, German aggression, or at least that's what we think. Okay, but they did do the invading, so there you go. And, Wilson as the Anglophile, and how he thought everything in Great Britain was hunky-dory and everything anywhere else was bad. This culture comp for this culture war. And so it modifies that relationship even further. We come in as not an allied power, but as an associated power. And what happens is, America, especially Pershing, insists on an independent American army. It's like, no, we're not fighting under your command. We will fight under our own command as part of a general overall strategy. And so the British and the French have no recourse except to accept this due to the manpower shortage that they had. Now, so everything looks really good. America, the British, we're all walking in lockstep. But one of the reasons being the Versailles Treaty, and the second one being the Great Depression that we just got done with. But the Versailles shows that the British and Europe are unchanged in their ideas of Europe and how to run things. Metternich there from Austria. And so what happens, you saw the imperial powers, they decided we're going to increase our power, we're going to increase our empires, no matter the consequence. And America was like going, what are y'all up to? This is what helped to get us into the war. Okay, so I helped get the war started, so to speak. This is in part of what helped us get in there. And then you see the gold bars on the left. FDR will take America off that gold standard in the 30s. And that confused international trade to a tremendous degree because people use that gold standard to basically rank the value of their currency. And so you get these commercial rivalries that intensified, and Britain's part of it, but Britain's antipathy with America is going to be relatively short lived, its own self, because of the with Mussolini and Tojo and Adolf Hitler here, this is the signals a threat to democratic institutions, and they come about in many ways because of this. Because of the Great Depression and what it does to national economies. And so you get these strong men who arrive like Hitler who says, hey, I'm going to fix things, or Il Duce who wants to take Italy back to the way it was during the Roman Empire, or Tojo who's just a weirdo, but whatever. But when that's going on, could you have stomped it out at that time? Yes, the world could, but in America, the idea was that World War I was an error, and we had been manipulated by the British into joining it. And you know what? We don't want any part of this, so y'all won't have to deal with it your own self. And that's where that isolationism question came from on your midterm, because Americans were isolationists. They do not want to get involved in another war. There was the American First group. There was Senator Nye and the Nye Committee, who talked about the merchants of death in World War I and how we fought that war and 100 and some odd thousand Americans were killed just because of money. And so it's kind of there's a serious disdain for international intervention. There'll be some differences. This thing is not going to be a replay of World War I. The tactics had changed drastically. You see that really by 1918 on the Western Front. But you have things like the Blitzkrieg and mobile warfare and the use of mature air power. What you see here are tanks punching a hole for the infantry to exploit. It's going to be much more rapid affair. And the destruction is going to be on a scale that World War I could not have imagined. 1939, the war actually breaks out. On September 1st, Hitler invades Poland and kind of ushers in officially World War I or World War II, though the Japanese are going to do some mess over in Manchuria as far back as 1932. And then so Poland gets conquered, then France is going to surrender after about 6 weeks, and the miracle at Dunkirk, you're going to see an entire British army that's moved off the continent in a hurry. Then there's the Battle of Britain, and this whole time, only people left fighting really are the British, and America's going, nope, don't want any part of it. Don't want any part of it. And so what happens is FDR is an internationalist at heart, even though the New Deal had been the sort of the crown jewel of his administration. What you end up with is a conclusion by FDR that Great Britain's going to need allies simply to survive, and that's going to be a marathon where we're testing the waters. And by the summer of 1940, France has just fallen, and FDR is going to help Great Britain, with something called cash and carry. So here's what we're going to do. We're not going to get involved in these loans like we got involved with World War I. It helped suck us in. So cash and carry is like going to the Walmart. Here, that destroyer will be $200,000. I need some cash. So it's going to be, if you can pay for it, you get the supplies, whether it's bullets, bombs, destroyers, whatever it is, airplanes, trucks. Later on, we're going to get stuck in a little more, whereas Britain couldn't pay. So they said, you know what, we're going to give you these old four-stacker destroyers to help you with your submarine, anti-sub warfare. And since you can't pay, we'll take something in trade. We're going to have a little barter system going, and we're going to trade you these destroyers, and you're going to give us bases to where we house our Navy. And then later came Lend-Lease, whereas FDR said, if you had a friend or a neighbor and their house was burning down, and you had a garden hose, you wouldn't charge them for it. You would lend it to them. And so the idea was here that we would lend you this stuff, and at some point you're going to pay us back. Now, a couple of things here come to mind. You see that more and more get sucked into this thing, but you have a way to help America get out of the Great Depression, because all of this production is going to lead to increased industrial output. And then all of a sudden now, at the beginning of the Great Alliance, we're helping Great Britain a lot. When it comes to Plan Dog. Plan Dog is something you got to dig deep into the literature to find, but it's the genesis of the Germany First strategy, that Germany is the biggest enemy, no matter what goes over there, over in Asia. You talk about Rainbow Five and some of those other things, but this becomes the idea that we're going to beat Germany first, which is a bone of contention amongst various cadres for a long time. Well, now that Great Britain is the only one fighting the Germans, invade. It's called Operation Sea Lion. But it never happened because of the Battle of Britain and the Luftwaffe not able to maintain air superiority over the beachhead. So the Battle of Britain became, a kind of a cornerstone, or not cornerstone, listen to me, a turning point in this. And so now Britain's got a respite, and Hitler's going to turn himself to another enemy. So you got to remember, he's got to go across that English Channel, something that had only happened successfully once that we know of in 1066, the Battle of Hastings. Next thing you know, William the Conqueror has conquered Great Britain, but now Hitler's like, you know what? And the point of that is, Hitler did not see the British as an enemy. He saw them as misguided Aryans, which is a little weird, but he's going to turn his attention to the East, to the Soviet Union, an unwieldy. They've been a world's pariah for a long time. This whole Bolshevik thing and the idea of advancing communism, and you got maybe even 10 million people died during the anarchy of the revolutions, the Reds versus Whites, and the provisional government versus the Bolsheviks. Then the Tsar owed everybody their brother money, so they're like, you know what, that's his problem, not ours. And so they don't pay it. Then they bowed out of World War I with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk at a very crucial time. And then the blood purges of the party and of the military and of the kulaks in the mid-30s. And everybody's going, these people are weird. These people are the kind of trash you don't want coming over to your house. But sometimes the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And communism is at odds with fascism and Nazism, even though they're both, I am not giving you a nickel for the difference. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend. DR to something we call realpolitik, or realpolitik. And he decides that if we recognize the USSR formally, which he does in 35, I mean, Hitler hadn't even got going by 35, that if we recognize them, then they can be a buttress, just like I've said here, a buttress against Germany's expansion and a buttress against Japan. Because remember, the Soviet Union stretches across 2 continents. So that's a good person to have on your side, even if you don't really like him. And old Marshal Stalin there, or Joseph Ugashvili, which is his real name, he and the old FDR are sitting there having. We're going to usher them into the Grand Alliance. Okay? And so by 1940, America and Britain, big buddies, bosom buddies. But the Russians had signed the Soviet-Nazi Non-Aggression Pact, which made everybody go, my goodness, what's happening? They agreed that they wouldn't attack each other. And so all of a sudden, what we saw was a buttress against Hitler has now been taken away. And then when Germany invades Poland on September the 1st, we're sitting there going, you know what? They violated Poland's sovereignty. And so everybody's wanting to go to war with Britain. We forget that the Soviet Union, everyone wants to go to war with Germany. Oh, gosh, I can't even talk. That what we forget is that the Soviet Union invades from the West, invades from the East. See, that's one of them days, people. They invade from the East and take over the other part of Poland. We just forgot that quite conveniently. All right. So anyhow, what we've got is Russia has now kind of bowed out, but they're going to bow back in. Operation Barbarossa. So now all of a sudden the Russians won't back in this alliance because he's going to invade the Soviet Union. Okay, so now Germany's in a 2-front war again. You think they'd figure that crap out one of these days, but now Great Britain's got an avenue. Great Britain went rolling the Nazis back, not without massive help. Now they've got the Russians, but the Russians are in pitiful shape. We help the British, we're going to help the Russians. Okay, so that Lend-Lease aid who've been sending to Britain also is going to start flowing into Russia. Things like trucks and airplanes. You see a P-60 King at Cobra over there. Essential materials like medicine and chemicals and petroleum products and just stuff that Russia's not real good at making, and ammunition. It's just ungodly the amount of stuff that we send them, even though it's very hard to get the convoys through. Down here in this bottom picture, you see an American Sherman tank crewed by Russians. Unfortunately, the Russian T-34 was a much, much better tank, but that's okay. And so what happens is when you take these convoys across the Atlantic, they get attacked by these U-boat wolf packs and whatnot. And so a lot of them get sunk or they get scattered. And so not as much material arrives as we wanted to send. And Stalin, he's kind of like my son's eating ice cream. And there's never enough. And he began to form this idea that America and Britain were holding back on him, that they really didn't want him to be successful against the Germans. So that's going to lead to some problems in the post-war. So what happens is you get some realigning, some realignment here, where Churchill and FDR both, they hated communists, but all of a sudden, we need these guys' help. And so America propaganda, listen to me, propaganda is going to morph. And I'm going to show you that on the next slide. This man is your friend. Oh, look at that smiling Russian right there. I remember Rocky IV, he fights for what? Freedom. What freedoms he got? None. Or look at Joe Stalin. That is him as Uncle Joe. Talk about a mess right there. My goodness. But you talk about is it a sinister alliance? With the Soviet Union being the odd man out, and Churchill desperately wanted to be the confidant and the main man for FDR, and actively tried to root the Russians out. Even though FDR really liked Joe Stalin, God only knows why, but he did. And so what happens is those supplies aren't coming through, and convoys get shorted, and their contents get diverted to Great Britain. And boy, Stalin, he's stirred up and mad, and then you get some misguided people. I mean, you know how politicians are. They say stupid stuff all the time. And so they made some comments about how the Russians were dying, and that was good for the post-war world. One of those was a senator from Missouri by the name of Harry Truman, which is going to cause some problems later on. So what happens is all of this gives rise to what Stalin sees as very sinister intentions. And it's going to create problems. Like I said, once this war is over, that's when the real problems begin, or even just. We don't know what happens on December the 7th, 1941. We know that. We'll see that in a different lecture. But the minute that happens and America is thrust into the war, they solidify Rainbow Five or Plan Dog as the Germany First strategy. But in the meantime, Stalin's like, hey, listen, America, you're in the war. Get a second front going now. We need to take the pressure off the Red Army. The siege of Stalingrad, the siege of Leningrad, the German army just been 40 miles from Moscow. It's a mess. But the point of this is, how does America get involved with Germany when the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor? We declare war on Japan. Germany declares war on us. So FDR got what he wanted. And so the American Army at this point in time is not ready. My grandfather Patterson was in the Army at this time. And it was simply, he said, we'd send all our stuff to the British and the Russians. He said, we had a broom handle for a machine gun. And tanks, they were on the side, they put a big board on the side and wrote tank on the side of a truck. So you're going to take time. Even as big as the American industrial machine is, it's going to take time. And in Britain this whole time, they don't want to go jump on the continent, act like World War I. So they're constantly saying we need to attack on the periphery. And then finally at the raid at a place called Dieppe in 42, when they get shoved back out in the ocean, almost literally, it's like, see, you can't get across the channel. So there's a problem with Stalin's perception and our inability to start a second front, and it's just a daggum crazy third wheel scenario for the Russians. But what happens is that alliance begins to shift because the Americans and the British grow closer. I mean, Churchill's always coming to America. Stalin never came over. I don't think we ever offered for him to, but he never came over. But that culture, that language, that Rainbow Five, we shared our atomic bomb research, even though Stalin knew all about it. The Atlantic Charter, we're not going to go into a great deal of detail on, and so Stalin feels left out. You know how people that feel left out get? They gets a little jealous, gets a little mad, gets a little in his feelings, so to speak. So there's that fear. But now we these, okay, and a race war. Well, it just depends. That Pacific War has all the hallmarks of it. You do see these prejudices. I mean, look at the picture on the side over there. Honorable fifth column, and every Japanese person has buck teeth and glasses. Folks, we don't put up with that today. But there's also some racial pride in the Japanese. That they think that the Asian for Asia for Asians, and they should be that they are the leading race. Same thing with America. I mean, it's all kinds of craziness that goes on. So what you get is some American and Japanese racial elements in this thing. War stereotypes. On the left, you see that this is the enemy. That's Japanese, almost animal-like or monkey-like. You're holding a knife, big old gigantic teeth, doing something sneaky. They're almost always shown as blind with thick glasses. Um, Almost always. I mean, it's not just sometimes, but always. But what we rarely see is the Japanese view of Americans. They think we're hairy and soft and ogreish and slow-witted and impure. And you see Roosevelt there. I mean, you've got a race war brewed up itself out in the vocabulary. Japanese, we make them out as systematically subhuman. You see Ernie Pyle, who's one of the greatest um, writers of the war period, or journalists of the war period. And when he says the enemy in Europe were still people, what does it say about the Japanese that they're not? Well, you get some mad dog vocabulary, almost always insane animals, beastly little monkeys, yellow dwarf slaves. And this wasn't just uttered from the soldiers on the front line who didn't know any better. But this is even like William Halsey, old Bull Halsey, in there, the man who, after Doolittle's raid flew off, he said, communicated to the fleet, haul ass with Halsey. I mean, in some ways he's pretty funny. But look at what he calls these guys: monkey men, yellow monkeys. Go get some monkey meat. Folks, that is a dehumanization of the enemy that could create some problems later on. So you're looking at check this out, these American propaganda posters. Tokyo Kid say, I mean, look at him, glasses, buck teeth. I mean, it's insane what we have. Jappy, so happy. Could you imagine that today? And this, look at what the Japanese soldier is doing to these females. Oh, I mean, tell me that doesn't conjure up some interesting images in people's heads. But America's not. Take a look at Roosevelt. I mean, I can read Japanese, but it's obvious that he is some form of animal or subhuman or primate. You look at that one on the left. That's pretty cool. We're going to crush the Anglo-Americans, build up the new Philippines, but it's in English. Why? There's a lot of English speakers there. Same thing with the rise of Asia. You've got Great Britain has been in that area of the world for a while. Asia for Asians. Build up the new Philippines, not just American Philippines where they've been hold on to you. Or check out old Roosevelt there. He looks like he'd be in a good slasher movie. So you look at this, and so far, you've got a lot of racial elements over there that you don't have over in Europe. Kill the enemy. And when you look at this, and my own grandfather's guilty of this, I think I can say that my grandmother has passed away about a year and a half ago, so I can say this, but taught me, analogize the killing of Japanese as a hunt, like fighting, like hunting a wild animal, like Old West images, good luck, good hunting. I mean, he talked that way. I mean, I grew up learning not Japanese as Japanese, I'm going to learn them as Japs. And so the idea of the extermination, just like you would that rodent right there, Jap trap. I mean, God, words that we don't even use today. And so you get some of this whole thing changes the image of the Japanese soldier. Becomes some type of Superman of some sort, powerful and skilled fighters. They're very good in the jungle, that kind of stuff. When they begin to fight to the last on these islands, banzai charges and kamikazes, it really, really, really causes America to stand up, take notice, and to see them as something much different than a German Wehrmacht. And then there's some atrocities, and these come from the way that Japanese soldiers were trained early on, building their Yamato Damashi, or their fighting spirit. Now, you see this, it's actually an Australian soldier. He's getting ready to be head, but that was how you build up your Yamato Damashi, by, doing this kind of stuff. And so there's beheadings, there's the Bataan death march. The living conditions are horrible in some of these places. The forced labor of Americans that are captured, mutilations of their bodies, rumors of cannibalism. On Chichijima, that almost got President George Herbert Walker Bush when he was shot down. These atrocities, all of that, this idea of being subhuman, or some sort of inferior race, so to something. The idea that we could virtually exterminate the Japanese, or that's what we needed to. And if you've seen the Pacific miniseries, which is an incredibly good one, about collecting skulls and ears and gold teeth and not taking prisoners. My own grandfather talked about it. He said, we wouldn't take any Japanese prisoner unless there was an officer around. shooting prisoners for sport. This thing's going to be ugly. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but it just happens to be in this presentation. And so we'll get to some of it, here. And then so the last slide here talks about taking that fight to Japan and the idea that we had to change tactics to compel their surrender, like firebombing of Tokyo, killed more than the atomic bombs ever thought about. I mean, it burnt the city apart. Tens of thousands, and not hundreds of thousands of people in a single night. So you get people are a legitimate object of war. And you got the island hopping. It becomes more brutal the closer to Japan you get. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Saipan. It is ungodly. And you cannot end the battles without virtually exterminating the Japanese garrisons. And that's going to be hard on American life. Like roughly 900 Americans are dying a day in the Pacific at the time Truman decides to drop the atomic bomb. And so the question is, was it racially motivated? Not entirely. But there is an element there, and there is no doubt about it. So, the grand alliance between America and Britain, because basically America becomes Anglophilic. But the antipathy for the Germans doesn't really materialize like it does in a racial sense, like it does with the Japanese. So, anywho, we'll stop that there. It's about 25 minutes, and we'll pick it up with Pearl Harbor.